Claire and I have just been around a couple of weeks as far as being a part of the Journey team, and we are so grateful. Just wanted to say thanks for so many of you who've been so welcoming to us, so kind. We want to know who you are and know your names, and I'm going to ask you somewhere between 1,000 and 1,100 times is about my cycle before I'll remember it, but don't give up. We're just so glad to be part of the family here. Thank you guys so much. I want to wrap up the series today. For 5 weeks, Jeremy has been kind of laying out the you were meant to be. For some of us, the big step is figuring out there is a me that I'm meant to be. It's not just random. And so this morning, I kind of want to dig into that. He's looked at subjects like, if you want to become the me you're meant to be, it's going to have to do with kind of redeeming your relationships. And a couple of weeks ago, he talked about how to redeem our time. And I want to finish with the last subject. And I'm just telling you in advance, it's going to be a little bit rough at the very beginning because it's a 4-letter word that I'm going to deal with. For some of you, it is not one of the 4-letter words that you enjoy using. And so I'm just warning you. So I want to talk about that for just a little bit. Then I want to share with you a passage in Scripture that I think is just one of the most bizarre in the whole Bible. If I wrote it, you would think I was crazy, but I didn't write it. I'm just going to read it. And then we'll wrap up our series and put a little bow on it on how we can become the we that we were intended to be. So we'll start with this. Our subject today is work, W-O-R-K. Perhaps you've heard of it. Work for some people is like one of your favorite things, and then there's all the rest who don't feel that way. When we go to church and talk about work, often it's talked about as a be careful. Be careful. You need balance. Make sure you don't go overboard with it. I heard the statement once that said, no one ever gets to the end of their life and wish they had gone to the office or gone to work anymore. But the longer I live, the more I realize that some people actually do feel that way. They don't end their life and go, I just wish I had done less. Some people don't feel that. And I think sometimes we way over categorize work. In the church world, one of the things we got to figure out is that God has an opinion about work. He has a view on work. And so I wanted to start off today and just explain to you that a lot of people feel like there's really important work. That's what people who seem to be life changers do. And then there's everybody else who just does the regular 4-letter word kind of work. Well, I just want to tell you, in the Bible, it was not perceived that way. As a matter of fact, almost every hero in the Bible had like what we would consider secular jobs, secular work. That God thought their work was important. I'll give you a few examples. Isaac, you've heard of him in the Bible. Well, he was a real estate developer. Jacob was a rancher. Joseph was a government official. Moses spent 40 years caring for livestock. Esther won a beauty pageant. Then, when she was through with that, as often we do, she went into government work. David worked with animal husbandry, we might call it. And then he was a military strategist, and then he became a principal leader. Lydia was successful as a businesswoman in textiles. Paul was a tent maker. The ultimate expression of God's passion for work is when he sent his son. We read in the Bible about 3.5 years of Jesus' life. But the first 30 years of his life were devoted to him being a carpenter. He was in the construction world. He made things with his hands. He didn't become important the day he started doing miracles for everybody to see. He became important when he was put on this earth. And God will never waste that much of your life that we call work. It's not a secular thing and there's a Christian thing. It is all part of God's intent for your life. Now, the 4th commandment in God's original top 10 list says not to abandon or forsake or not give place to the Sabbath. In other words, God wants you to set aside a day to pay particular focus on him, to rest and be kind of refilled. It's like stopping for gas or getting refueled in life. And the fact that you're here today, to some degree, you kind of buy into that at least a little bit. What a lot of times we forget to mention at church is that while God puts emphasis on that, if you just read a little bit further, I'll just give you this little piece of that. It actually says, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, for in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth. While it says not to forget the seventh, the emphasis is equally as much on for 6 days you shall work. Now, it's not saying that we have to have a 6-day work week, because some of you are already like, I'm checking out, dude. I can't go 6 days a week. And then some of you are going, only 6 days? That sounds easy. Well, it depends on how you view work, but God puts a high priority on work. The Bible is written to workers, by workers, and about workers. Even the beginning of creation talks about Jesus' work of creation. So in God's eyes, work matters. I want to give you this 3 quick thoughts around work. We all see it a little bit differently in this room. So I've spent this morning and I've asked now probably 17, 18 people what they do, and then ask them this crazy question, do you like it? Out of, I'm going to say, I think 17 would be accurate. Now, 11 or 12 people have said no. What do? I do that. Do you like it? No. And you may fit that category. Although I've talked to several who said, oh, I love what I do. And then this added caveat, whatever a caveat is, if there is one, I'm about to use it right here. This added little piece, quite a few of you have said, I really love what I do. I just don't like the people with whom I do it. And that might reflect on most of us, and you can imagine what it feels like for me in a new place. So I want to give you 3 thoughts about work, and then we'll move on from that. The first one, I'll give you a statement, then a myth that goes with it, and a truth. The first statement is this: work is not a good thing, but it is a necessary thing. And that's the way a lot of people in this room would see it. The reason I go to work is because I've grown accustomed to living indoors and eating food on a regular basis, and that's what it takes. They don't let me do it for free. So it's not necessarily a good thing, but it's a necessary thing. The myth that goes with it is work is just kind of a curse of a fallen world ever since Eve screwed everything up, you know? Ever since that moment, we've just had to work to survive. And so work becomes just that. Work is a thing of survival. The truth is that God honors work. God expects work. He values work. He holds it as a really high value in his economy. It's not just a thing you have to do. Now, it may feel like a necessity. I don't doubt that it is one, but it's not just a necessity. The second one is this: my work life and my real life are very different lives. Here's the myth that goes along with it, and I've heard it said, I've gone to church a lot of my life, which it's amazing that I'm as normal as I am, but the statement that I've often heard at church or from church people is they say something like this: my work is my living, it's not my life. And so there's this weird compartmentalization of saying there's 2 kinds of life. On tomorrow morning, I'm going to get up and go do that part, but today I'm doing this part. Well, actually, you might say, this morning I'm doing this part, and then I'm going to do a different part, and then Monday I do another part. Well, I think that is probably not true. God never compartmentalized your life that way. Matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, Jeremy did a great job. Remember, if you were here, he had a box with all the little compartments, and he began to talk about that we tend to segment our life, but God never intended it that way. The truth is, the average American adult will spend almost half of their waking life at work. And the belief that God just sticks you into that part so that you can experience whatever's left and there's not a purpose in it other than survival would be really wasteful for God. And God never wastes opportunity. That God didn't put you where you are at work just so you could survive, that he has a plan. And I'd be remiss not to tell you this: part of the me you were meant to be has to do with work. You will never find the you were intended to be if you separate that half of your waking life from the rest. I'll give you a third one, and then we'll step out of this part of it. The third statement is, our work often determines our identity. Maybe I should say it differently. We often allow our work to determine our identity. Often when you talk to people, they'll say, hey, or somebody will introduce you and say, hey, this is Bill, he's a plumber. Or that's Jane, and she's an accountant. If you know a lot of Bills and Janes, that's how they would say it. But if you don't, that would make no sense at all. But often it becomes our identity. I'll be honest with you, even outside of vocationally, sometimes your vocation or your identity becomes mom or dad. Because if you're a mom, 8,000 times a day, somebody says, Mom, mom, mom. But mom is not who you are. It is a huge part of your life, but your identity is not. As a matter of fact, God forbid, if you cease to be mom to someone, you would still be you. Pastor is what I do. It's not who I am, because if I ceased to be that, I wouldn't cease to be. And so it often becomes a big part of our identity. There's two ways to think about work. I think this one, not always, but often has to do with some age. Now, if you are somebody who is, let's just say, mid-40s forward, I hate to categorize, older than that, especially people who lived through the Depression often viewed work this way. Matter of fact, my dad would have said this. Many of you, your fathers, would have said this. It's the myth. It says, it's work. Shut up and do it. It'll be over in a few decades. Basically, work was that thing you put your head down and endured. I hate my job. I've hated it for 30 years. Shut up. Do it. It'll be over, and then you can retire a couple of years before you die. Work is that thing you do, so right before you die, you can live. That's what work was. Some of you have felt that way, man, right out of high school. You jumped in, worked on a line somewhere. You jumped into your thing right out of college, and now it's just that thing. It's just a thing you do. Get over it. You don't whine about it. Man up. Quit your whining. Just do it. Well, then that's one side. The myth on the other side is, and I hear it said a lot in our world today, my work should be the things I love to do. I just need to find a job where I get to do the things I really enjoy and I really love. And I shouldn't stop looking until I find that. As a matter of fact, some would say it this way. If you do the things you love to do, you'll never work a day in your life. Well, I believe that's true for many of you. If you do the things you love to do, you may never work a day in your life. Grow accustomed to the basement. There's this often taught thing that says, man, if you can't find exactly the thing you love most, then you shouldn't do it. And then for everybody else in the room, they would go, reality is going to suck for you. Because it's not always the way it plays out. It is great, and some of you do. Like you are right in your wheelhouse. The thing you do every day is the thing you're most passionate about, the thing you love most. And I'm not saying it never happens, but I am going to say if everybody in this room pursues that their whole life, you will never be at a job more than about 3 days. Because often we have to learn to love the things we do, not just do the things we love. That there's a combination of those two. That if I'm only happy when I have what I want, I'm probably never going to be happy, but happiness often comes when I learn to be happy with what I have. It's just what healthy people do. And so I'm going to say this to you when it comes to work. The truth is, value is wherever I choose to find it. That if my work environment isn't perfect, perfect isn't required for my happiness or joy to come from it. Because I can choose that. I can find what is good. By the way, if you're going to get married and the only way you're going to stay married is if everything there makes you happy, you know what you're called? Divorced. Single. Because you'll never find a place you will find, or a person, or a home. What you will find is that there is joy in what you do when you find joy in what you do. It doesn't mean in every case you stay there, but I am saying there's a bigger perspective. I would say this, that work matters. We should work with excellence and with integrity and skill. If you're a follower of Christ, you should set an example of what work looks like in our world today, and sometimes I'm not sure we have. That people should see our ethic, our work ethic, our honesty ethic, our relational ethic. And they should say, I don't know what is different about them, but there's something that makes this a better place for me to be. So if you're going to be there and spend half of your waking life, I will tell you this, God will use your work to help create the you were meant to be. The value of work is absolutely necessary. Now, there's all kinds of crazy things in the Bible. I don't know if you've ever read much of it. Most people haven't. But if you just open it to any place, if you use a book or if you're if you're electronically driven, if you just fly through and stop in a spot, there's all kinds of crazy things. I think one of the weirdest places in the whole Bible is in 2 Kings chapter 6. It's one of my favorite spots in the Bible. Share it with you. I'm just telling you in advance. It's a little bit weird, so get ready. 2 Kings chapter 6 starts with this. In verse 24, it says, sometime later, however, Ben-Hadad, that's a great name. If you're pregnant, that may be something to consider, Ben-Hadad, for your son or daughter, depending on how you like to do things. King Ben-Hadad of Aram mustered his entire army and besieged Samaria, and as a result, there was a great famine in the city. It starts this way. There's this huge city, huge by their standard in that day, called Samaria. Samaria was a place, as we study backwards, that had upward of about 40,000 people in it. So maybe a little smaller than Jackson proper, but almost as big in landmass. So we'll just say if you took Journey on the north side and went all the way through downtown of Jackson, and about the same width as Jackson, that was about the size of Samaria, about 40,000 people, and they built walls around it. It set over 300 feet off of the floor of the valleys around it, so it set way up on a hill. It was really beautiful, had a great view, a beautiful setting. Matter of fact, you can go Google it, and you'll find they found ruins of the walls and lots of stuff that happened in this story today. That's where it's sitting, and it says there was a group of people who hated the people, God's people, in Samaria, and they had decided to overthrow it. Well, they had these 20 to 30-foot walls all the way around the city. Imagine that little building process. Now, I know we talk about walls, and we don't want to get into that today. I'm just saying before it was talked about, they just had them. Okay, they had the outer wall between 8 and 12 foot thick. So if you can imagine, back wall to way up here in thickness, and then inside that wall, a secondary wall, and they ran little walls in between it to buffer or to support the outer wall. So this huge city with this huge wall, and they weren't put there to keep people in, they were put there to keep people out. And it was a good thing it was there, because there was a group of people that said they wanted to come against the city. And the only way they could gain entrance, or the only way they could overthrow the city, is they decided to besiege it. So tens of thousands of the enemy set up camp all the way around this huge city. Imagine around Jackson. So since we're the northern part, right up here at Three-Way, they're all around, all the way down. If you go all the way out to the west past 412, there's the wall. They were down from that. If you go all the way to the east, however you want to see it, that's where they were. Tens of thousands of them. And they said, we're going to camp out. We call it camping today. They called it besieging then. We're going to camp out, and nobody's going to bring food into this place. And nobody's going to get out of this place. No medical help, no anything. And we're just going to wait them out till eventually they die. I don't know how big your pantry or your refrigerator, if you have an extra refrigerator, because that's when you know you're first world, when you got 2 refrigerators. I don't know how much stuff you've got stashed away, even that the kids don't know about, but I'm just telling you, there'd be a day it would end. And these guys waited, and so for weeks and weeks and weeks, if they've been camped out, listen to how crazy it gets. It said one day, as the king of Israel was walking around the wall of the city, a woman called to him. He could walk around the wall because the walls were huge, right? She called to him and said, please help me, my lord, the king, which is the way we all want to be addressed. And he answered, because he was a little frustrated, if the Lord doesn't help you, what can I do? I have neither food from the threshing floor nor wine from the winepress to give you. But the king asked, here's the moment. He said, what do you want from me, woman? That's if you want to start a great conversation, start with that. What do you want from me? I got nothing. You're hungry, we're all God's children hungry. What do you want from me? And then he did the dumbest thing ever. He said, what's the matter? Because see, when you ask that question, then you have to hear the answer. Well, this is what he got out of that. She replied, this woman said to me, come on, let's eat your son today. Let me just stop right there. I didn't write that, okay? And you would say, maybe, that's ridiculous. I get hungry about 6 times a day, I've noticed. But that's what I call hungry. But I have a feeling there's a different thing called hungry that I don't experience. They were experiencing that. It tells us a little bit earlier, they were to the point that you couldn't buy anything without a huge amount of money, and even at a point, you couldn't buy anything with a huge amount of money. They were so desperate, so this woman came to me and said, if we die as moms, our whole family's going to die. We're all we've got left. And so we're going to do the unthinkable, like you read about from plane crashes in the mountains and crazy other things. So I got scammed, she said. She came to me and said, listen, my son, your son today, my son tomorrow, and now she has hidden her son. So if you're the king, this is a bad moment. She goes, listen, there was this online ad, and I clicked on it, and now they took my son. What are you going to do? Now, the king's got a couple of weird options. One, he can just say, buyer beware, or in this case, friar beware. That was rich. He could say, you're dumber than a rock if you fell for that. That's the oldest trick in the book. The eat my son, scam. Do you not read scams online? Snopes. He could say that, but that's not very kingly. Or the other hand, he could say, get out your Instapot. But neither way was it going to help the city. And so it tells us that he kind of just tore his clothes and mourned. So here's the setting, this beautiful, huge city on a hill, God's people that he set aside. Inside those walls, things are falling apart. They're not falling apart, they've fallen apart. There are people dying every day. They're not at this point without a lot of people already losing their lives. And then one more little part of the setting outside the walls, chapter 4, verse 3, or 7, chapter 7, verse 3, says this. Now there were 4 men with leprosy sitting at the entrance of the city gates. So already we find 4 guys with a contagious disease. The reason they're outside the gates is because they have a contagious disease. And if they were let inside the gate, well, then everybody would have a contagious disease. Here's a little assumption. If they're starving inside the gates, I'm betting outside the gates it's not better. Because typically when something was besieged, they would take food, leftovers, just whatever scraps you had, and they would throw it up over the walls to the people who were left out. And that's how they would eat. But if now you're back to boiling little Johnny, there are no leftovers. And so these guys have got a disease that has already ravaged their body and is killing them. And now to add to that, they're starving. The only thing worse than being a leper is a starving leper. I read that once. They ask themselves a question, and I love the Bible because it actually tells us the question. When they're sitting around outside dying, they said this, why should we sit here waiting to die? They ask each other. And then they did a little benefits, pros and cons list, choice list. They said, well, we will starve if we stay here. That was a given. But the famine is in the city. Well, they're not letting us in the city anyway, but even if we did, if we sit here, we'll die. If we go in there, we'll die. This isn't a great list so far. So they come up with a third option, and there's almost always a third option. And they said, so we might as well go out and surrender to the Aramean army. And if they let us live, so much better. But if they kill us, well, we'll just be dead. We could sit here and die, or we could try to go in there and die. There is a 0 chance of living. So why don't we go down the mountain to the Arameans, the enemy, the people who came here to kill all of us, with a communicable disease? I bet they'll let us right into camp. But listen, the worst thing they can do is kill us. And dead is, if you want to quote this would be a good Instagram moment, dead is dead. So let's go and give it a shot. Now, my dad used to say ridiculous things because he's a father. And that's part of the gifting of being a dad. He used to say this, let's do something even if it's wrong. Now, when I did things that were wrong, he never saw it that way. But I get his point that I'd rather do something than just sit here and do nothing and die. Well, evidently they came from that same school. Maybe they were fathers. And they said, I'd rather at least try and die than sit here and die. And so off they went. Now, I find a lot of things humorous in Scripture that maybe you don't, but maybe that just says I have a keener sense of humor, or maybe that I'm really sadistic. Because what I read in the next words is these guys, after dark, made their way down a mountain. And I'm just picturing guys whose bodies are falling apart, walking down a mountain in the middle of the night. And see, for me, I find that humorous. If there was YouTube, that one would go viral. as they make their way down the hill, and no doubt they're scared to death. No doubt they expect there to be scouts from the army or somebody out from the camp that are going to pick them off. It's going to be an arrow or a sword or some kind of thing. And as they're walking down and nervous, and I bet they're talking to each other going, it's been good knowing you. And I'd give an arm or a leg to be able to live a little longer. As they're going down the hill. But they keep getting closer and closer, and they smell the food cooking. And they see, can you imagine 10, 20, 30,000 people set up around the city, how much stuff they would have to have? And eventually they find themselves in the camp and nobody there. Where could 20 or 30,000 military people go at once? Did they all eat a little something they shouldn't? Did they eat gas station sushi? And now they've all had to run to the woods? Where could they be? And the answer is, I don't have time to read all the verses, you can though, is that in the middle of the night, God just made a noise, because making a noise is easy if you're God, because you created noise. And when the military people heard it, they were smart, and they said, they've hired somebody to come against us. Somehow they've gotten word out, and now they're coming, and so they all fled because they didn't want to be sitting in camp when they were attacked. And now 4 lepers find themselves in this camp made for 20 or 30,000 people with all the belongings for months and months and months. And so it says when the men with leprosy arrived at the edge of the camp, they went into one tent after another, eating and drinking wine, and they carried off silver and gold and clothing and hid it. And finally they said to one another, they walked in and they said, food. And they ate. I think they ate a lot. I think they ate it fast. And I think it made a mess. I don't think they used napkins or forks or knives or anything. I think they ate because they're starving. And then they saw gold and silver. They said, gold and silver is 2 of my favorite things. And clothes. And they took them. And all of a sudden, these guys who were literally falling apart felt alive again. All of the things we've needed, wanted, and dreamt of. And so they start taking it out into the shadows and burying it. So just in case this works out, they can come back and get it. And they went and got more. And in the middle of it, somebody had a moment of clarity, which, by the way, in the middle of everybody's life, they need one of these moments of clarity. And this is what somebody said. I don't know if you have this somebody in your life or if it's you. They said, hey, hang on. Hey, guys, stop. This isn't good. This is a day of good news, and we're not sharing it with anyone. We've got enough food to live for months, and inside those walls, there's people who will die tonight. This isn't good that we keep that. I'm loving this. I'm so out of breath right now. I've been running, burying stuff, and man, I don't have much to run with. And this is great, but this seems bad. I'd love to say, man, those guys just had such big hearts. They've got a disease and they're caring about the people in there, but then it tells you the rest. It actually says, it's not a good day. We're not sharing it with anyone. If we wait till morning, some calamity will certainly come upon us. In other words, they're going to look over the walls and realize we've spent the night down here by ourselves. And they weren't worried about everybody else. They were worried about themselves. But the moment they had was still a good one. So the end of the story is they made their way back up the hill. More comedy, YouTube. They knocked on the gate and said, hey, it's us, the lepers. And they said, shut up, leave us alone. We're tired of lepers. No, you don't understand. It took a while, but eventually they convinced them, and the gates opened up, and the end of the story is this. About 40,000 people's lives were saved because of 4 outcasts with a contagious disease who had absolutely nothing to live for. You know, the crazy thing is, most of the time in life, the people who make the biggest impact is not the one that was voted most likely to succeed. It was the one who was available, the one who was usable, and sometimes the one who was desperate enough to do something that mattered. It's usually the way God works. That is so God's style. As we kind of wrap up a series, becoming the you were meant to be, a couple of thoughts to leave you with. One of them was this, first lesson, don't underestimate what God is up to in your life. Just because you are where you are and it may not make sense why you're there today, don't underestimate that God is up to something. I'll just tell you this, there is a you that he created you to be, and he's busy working on it. Sometimes your life may be exhausting or incredibly frustrating, but I'll just tell you what happens. If I can bring my want-tos aligned with God's want-tos, that's when we make progress. Often the me I want me to be and the me God wants to make me are two different things. In your car, when one wheel is going that way, one tire is pointed that way, and one wheel or one tire is pointed that way, you can still drive it, right? Everybody, have you ever seen a tire where it wasn't in alignment? The good news is it's still drivable. The bad news is it's not drivable for long. You fight all the time to keep it on the straight path, and then the wear is overwhelming, and maybe you feel like that's your life. That I'm trying so hard to go the direction I'm supposed to go, but I'm just worn out. I'll be honest with you. I've been trying this for a while. I've been trying to quit the bad things and start the good things and live with the people and endure the stuff and fight my way to a healthy place. But I'll be honest, it is exhausting and it's frustrating, and I don't know how much longer I can do it. And a big piece of it is trying to understand the me I'm meant to be and the me God meant for me to be. If I can get my desires and his desires to line up, you were not intended to live out of alignment. He's not angry because you're out of alignment, but nor is he satisfied, nor should you be. He's not punitive, like I'll show them, I'll wear their tires out. He's just saying, man, that's a choice you have to make. So sometimes the biggest challenge is this: I just don't know what I'm supposed to be. As a matter of fact, we're going to spend the next few weeks digging into, Jeremy will be back to start next week, digging into some things that we can do in our lives that will help us find alignment so we can travel down a straight path and not be as worn as we are now. But I'll just say this: don't underestimate what God is up to in your life. Second one is this: God will not waste any experience or situation in your life. For these guys sitting outside, they could have said, you know what, forget the whole thing. We're dying. We'll just sit here and die. I'll just say this. I don't know. When I talk to people, they always say, Chris, you don't understand what I've been through. And I don't. But I'll just say this. Whatever you've been through, God will not waste 1 minute of your life. He will redeem it, buy it back, use it for good. If you've made mistakes, God will use your mistakes. If it feels like somehow you've been beat up for no reason, God will use that. If you've got a long, painful story, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to minimize that, but I'm just saying this, that God will not only not use you because of your story, he'll actually use your story to benefit the world in which you live, to help it make the you were meant to be. Just because you've been through pain doesn't mean that God's not got a better plan for you. But I promise this, he won't waste your pain. He'll do something good with it. For some of us, that's all the hope we have, is that maybe all of this crap I've been through, maybe it has a better purpose on the end. Whether you did it or whether it feels like it was done to you is irrelevant, that God wants to buy those things back. Don't underestimate. Second, God won't waste any experience in your life. We used to live over in southwest Missouri, close to Branson. In Branson, there's a show for everything. If you want to sing, if you want to, there were a group of people there. They were called the Acrobats of China, and one of my friends was in management there, so I got to know them. Almost none of them spoke English, and they were all this tall. But man, they could do incredible things. So I got to hang out with them a little bit, and it got me really interested and began to study some of the things, because they would fly from a trapeze. And one of the things I learned about that whole process is on the trapeze, there are two kinds of people. There's two designations. There's two jobs. One of them is called flyers, and that's her. It's kind of the sexy, cool, adventuresome spot. It's what the spotlight follows them. They do all the crazy cool stuff. And then there's a second place, and it's the person down here at the bottom. They spend a lot of their time a little bit upside down. They're called catchers. Sometimes they're called porters. And when you look at it, one looks like a skilled position, and one looks like a lineman. You know, I just catch people. The other one's like, wow, not this one down, upside down. They just have taped up arms and hands. The truth is, the one that makes the whole show is the catcher, not the flyer. They do everything. As a matter of fact, when the flyer starts swinging, their only job is just to swing and fly. But the one who makes sure everything works is the catcher. And so the catcher will watch the swing and the cadence of the flyer, and he will get in time with them. And then when the moment is right, they say a word. It's sort of like a word. Maybe it's not a word, but it sounds like a word. Well, it doesn't even really sound like a word, but they call it a word. They don't say go, because the word go sounds like the word no. And evidently those are bad things to get confused if you're flying really high in the air. So they use the word hip, H-E-P. Matter of fact, if you go to the circus or go to a show sometime, if you'll just listen, you'll hear that hip. And that means I am here. I am ready. I'm the man. And it tells the flyer, you can go. They say the hardest thing to become a flyer is realizing and being confident that they'll catch you every time. As a matter of fact, when you first start, they don't let go very quickly. Matter of fact, some places they have little training for this, and when you watch people go there, sometimes they'll never let go. And it's not because they're so afraid of falling, much like flying in life. Most people aren't afraid of flying, they're just afraid of the quick stop at the bottom. Well, it's the same way. But the more assured you become of the one calling the cadence, hip, the more free you are to fly. Until eventually you know, even if I fly imperfectly, there is somebody with strong, dry hands that will catch me. And I just want to tell you, for you to become the you were intended to be, you're going to have to be really assured that there is someone with strong and dry hands who wants to call the cadence in your life. And if you will allow him, you can fly. Here's the good news: even if you don't fly perfectly, he will catch you because he has very strong and very dry hands. And he does not miss. As a matter of fact, the Bible says there is literally nothing that can separate you from the love of God. Good things, bad things, high things, low things, well-intentioned things, poorly intentioned things, because he is just that capable. We call it faith when it comes to the Bible. Faith to believe that my biggest job is to allow myself to be caught. And it's kind of our last point. The goal is not to get caught. The goal is to trust the one who can catch, because he has a life for you. And for some of you, he has been saying, yep, for a long time. Man, sometimes it is so scary to let go. Sometimes to even follow him enough to say, God, if you will love me and forgive me, I will let go of me. Sometimes it's enough to say, God, if there's a me I was meant to be, it scares me to death to let go of a little bit of control in my life. And so if you want me to do, I will. The song we just sang before we wrapped up says, do what you want. Do what you want. The tough part of that phrase is it means I'm not just going to do what I want. Yep. Can I ask you a question? If you knew that if you let go, that God would catch you, what would you be willing to do? Do you believe that in your life maybe there's something bigger than you and that God has a plan? Because he does. Being a flyer is really easy as long as you know you've got a really good catcher. One of the things we do around here week after week is we try to do things that help us remember that. For instance, we take communion here every week, and a part of that, it honestly is, it's reflective, saying, God, if I can remember who you are. So there was a point when God looked down and said, you are never going to make it on your own, and I'll send my son. And his son literally stretched out his arms and said, jump. And every time we take communion, it is a way to remember that his hands are strong and his hands are dry. And he is in it for you. If you're here today and that whole faith thing is brand new to you, we would just say this. Man, if that's not something you're ready to do, we respect that. Matter of fact, we respect that you would walk through a journey to make really important decisions. We'd think you were crazy if you didn't. And so in a minute, we're going to sing a song that talks about how do we get past the fear that if I let go, I'll fall. When we're finished, the ushers are going to come forward and they're going to pass some plates, and with them there'll be some bread and some juice. And I just say to you, if you feel like today is not a day for you to do that, let it pass by. There's no judgment here. We've all sat where you sat. And for those of us who choose to take that, I just say to you, would you take a minute and reflect? The incredibly strong, dry, powerful, consistent hands of our catcher. And maybe you can begin to think, if I heard a hip, would I be willing to take the next step? Because that's what we're supposed to do here at Journey. So God, would you help us with that? Would you help us not wish we had the life that we were meant to have, but would you help us learn that without the understanding that you are powerful and strong, and that you catch 1 out of 1 times, that to date you've never missed. That with all the inconsistency and crazy in the world, that you are the one stability we have. And if you can use 4 lepers who had almost nothing left to give to make such a huge impact, I can't even imagine what you might do through our little lives, through a room full of people. If we could just let go of whatever's holding us back and trust you, would you help us do that today? Would you help us follow through? We ask that in your name because you said we can, and we invite you to hip the way.